Hello there, and welcome to Forgotten Worlds. My name is Thomas, and tonight I'd like to take you somewhere both familiar and strange into the deep waters of memory, myth, and imagination. As you settle in, maybe lying back, maybe letting your thoughts drift like tides, consider this question: what if Atlantis was not alone? What if it was not a single city swallowed by the sea, but just one of many forgotten civilizations, erased yet remembered in whispers across time? Plato wrote of Atlantis in words that have outlived empires, a land of wealth and brilliance, struck down by a cataclysm and lost beneath the waves. For centuries, people have searched for it, mapped it, dismissed it, dreamed it. But perhaps the more haunting thought is this: what if Atlantis is only a symbol, a name that stands in for dozens, maybe hundreds, of worlds now gone? Think of the ocean for a moment, its surface calm tonight, but hiding mountains taller than Everest, valleys deeper than any canyon, and landscapes that once stood in the Sunday. Somewhere down there, entire chapters of human history, or prehistory, may lie beyond reach, waiting. This isn't a debate, and it isn't a treasure hunt. It's an exploration, a gentle wandering through myth, archaeology, and the unknowable silences of deep time. Together, we'll ask, how many civilizations have risen, only to be washed away? How many Atlantises have come and gone, their stories surviving only as echoes? To begin, we need to step into the very first, telling the one that set all of this in motion, the words of Plato, and the story of Atlantis as he described it. When we speak of Atlantis, we begin not with maps or sonar scans, but with words. Words written over 2,000 years ago, by a philosopher whose influence still drifts through every corner of thought: Plato. In two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, he unfolded a tale that has never stopped echoing. It was not a myth from folk tradition, not a legend passed down in songs or carved on temple walls. It was a story framed as memory, a recollection of something told to Solon, the great Athenian lawmaker, during his travels in Egypt. There, priests of Sais spoke of a land beyond the Pillars of Heracles, a place that had risen to splendor and then, in a single day and night, had been consumed by the sea. Plato described Atlantis as vast, larger than Libya and Asia combined, though his sense of geography was shaped by the world known to him. He placed it in the Atlantic, beyond Gibraltar, though interpreters have argued for centuries over what exactly beyond might mean. Was it an island in the open ocean, a distorted memory of Crete, Santorini, or Cyprus? Or perhaps an echo of lands now drowned, swallowed when the seas rose after the last ice age? Plato never clarified. Instead, he painted with broad strokes, as if the point was not cartography but allegory. Yet his description was vivid enough to capture imagination. Atlantis, he said, was a civilization of astonishing wealth. Its plains were rich with crops, its forests teemed with animals, and its rivers carried abundance from the mountains to the sea. The Atlanteans mined orichalcum, a mysterious metal second only to gold in value. Some scholars suggest it was copper alloyed with zinc, others that it was a poetic invention. Either way, it gleamed in Plato's telling, coating temples and walls with a reddish fire. At the heart of the city, concentric rings of land and water formed a pattern unlike anything else in Greek architecture. Bridges crossed the canals, joining palaces and gardens. Towers gleamed above the harbors, and temples to Poseidon, father of Atlantis, shimmered with ivory and precious stones. Imagine standing there, the sea breeze carrying the smell of salt and incense, the sound of ships in the harbor mingling with chants rising from marble steps. It was a vision of order, of harmony between nature, architecture, and power. Plato did not merely describe splendor, he described technology. Atlantis, he wrote, commanded fleets larger than any known in his age. Its navy stretched across the sea, exerting influence over islands and coasts until its power reached as far as Egypt and Italy. The Atlanteans, he suggested, were masters not only of war but of engineering. Their canals watered fields with precision. Their docks welcomed ships of vast size. Their walls shone with alloys no longer seen in his own time. And yet, for all their brilliance, the Atlanteans were not immortal. In Plato's telling, they became arrogant. They sought to conquer Athens, but were defeated. The gods, displeased with their pride, sent punishment. In a single cataclysm, one terrible day and night of misfortune, the land sank into the sea. Mountains crumbled, harbors drowned, and the memory of Atlantis was erased, preserved only in words. What makes this story endure is not just the image of a golden city, nor the drama of its destruction, but the way it resonates with something deeply human. It is the story of hubris and fall, of greatness undone by excess. Civilizations have always told such stories. Think of the Tower of Babel, of Sodom, of Icarus flying too close to the sunday. Atlantis is another version of the same pattern, brilliance followed by collapse. Perhaps that is why it lingers, not as history alone, but as parable. And yet, Plato complicates the matter, for he presents Atlantis not as fiction, but as inherited memory. He insists it is true, passed from Egyptian priests to Solon, then to Critias, and at last to his readers. Whether he intended this as a literal account or a crafted allegory is debated still. Some argue he invented it as a political lesson, a way of praising Athens by contrasting it with a corrupt rival. Others insist he drew upon older stories, fragments of real events carried through oral tradition. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, floods, all were common in the Mediterranean world. Could Atlantis have been inspired by the eruption of Thera, which shattered Santorini and devastated the Minoan civilization? Or perhaps by other, less remembered catastrophes along the shifting coasts of the ancient seas? To imagine Atlantis is to feel a strange double pull, part history, part dream. On one hand, the description is precise, with measurements of canals and walls, with lists of metals and animals. On the other, it is imbued with allegory, a morality tale cloaked in geography. Plato gives us just enough to see and just enough to doubt. That tension is the secret of its endurance. Picture it again, the concentric rings, the glimmer of orichalcum, the temples to Poseidon rising above the harbor. Picture the markets filled with merchants from distant lands, the ships crowding the docks. Then picture the sky darkening, the earth shuddering, waves surging higher than walls. Picture the silence afterward, when the sea had closed over everything. That image alone explains why Atlantis has held the human imagination for millennia. Perhaps what captivates us most is not the grandeur, but the possibility. If one civilization so advanced could vanish without a trace, how many others might have existed before recorded history? If Plato's tale was even partly rooted in truth, it suggests the past is not a straight line but a cycle: creation, flourishing, destruction, forgetting. Atlantis becomes not just one city, but a symbol for all the worlds we have lost. And so, the story endures. Scholars dismiss it, adventurers chase it, writers and filmmakers remake it. It remains a mirror, reflecting our fears and hopes, the fear that our own world, with its towers and technologies, might share the same fate. The hope that beneath the waves lies proof that we are not the first to build, to dream, to fall. Before we can weigh evidence, before we can sift through archaeology and geology, we must acknowledge this. Atlantis captured the imagination not because it was proven, but because it was possible. Because it lies at the threshold where history and myth blur, where fact dissolves into poetry, and perhaps that is where it was always meant to live. And that brings us to another question. If Atlantis was so vividly described, why has no trace been found? Why do mainstream historians call it a fable? even as seekers insist otherwise. To explore that, we must turn to the problem of evidence and the difficulty of proving a world swallowed by the sea. When we step from myth into science, the ground shifts beneath our feet. The luminous city Plato described begins to dissolve into questions, into silences, into the stubborn absence of ruins on the ocean floor. Mainstream archaeology has long held that Atlantis is not a place but a parable, a story crafted by Plato to illustrate pride and downfall, not to preserve memory. To many scholars, the lack of evidence is proof enough. No artifacts, no inscriptions, no stratified layers of a drowned civilization have ever been unearthed to confirm the tale. And in the sciences, absence is often taken as negation. If nothing remains, then perhaps nothing ever was. Yet, here is the paradox. The ocean is both the greatest preserver and the greatest eraser. It cradles ancient shipwrecks for thousands of years in the silence of its depths, but it also scours coastlines, grinds monuments into sand, and buries landscapes beneath sediments thicker than mountains. What we expect from terrestrial ruins, stones weathered but still standing, cities preserved under layers of ash, does not apply easily to the sea. The ocean floor is not a library of the past. It is a restless, shifting canvas. Imagine for a moment a city built on a coast 12,000 years ago, when sea levels were far lower than today. At the end of the Ice Age, as glaciers melted, the ocean rose more than 100 meters worldwide. Shorelines advanced inland, swallowing valleys, plains, and deltas where people once lived. A settlement on those vanished coasts would now lie far beneath the waves, hidden under layers of mud and sand. Even if walls and streets survived the initial flooding, the weight of time, tectonic motion, and currents would slowly erase their outlines. What diver could find them? What sonar scan could distinguish them from natural stone? This is the heart of the problem. Sunken civilizations are notoriously difficult to prove. The tools of archaeology were honed on dry land trowels in the soil, brushes on the stone, trenches dug beneath desert suns. Underwater, the work is slower, more uncertain. Visibility is limited. Access is costly. The deeper one goes, the more hostile the conditions become, and most of the seafloor has never been surveyed in detail. In truth, we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the landscapes hidden beneath our own oceans. Mainstream archaeologists, cautious by necessity, remind us that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. To assert that an advanced civilization once thrived and then disappeared requires more than a story, more than a hint. It requires material proof, inscriptions, artifacts, bones, stratigraphy, things that can be measured and dated. Without these, the Atlantis of Plato remains, to them, a moral tale rather than a memory. But here is where curiosity lingers. Human history, as recorded in books and tablets, stretches back perhaps 5,000 years. Archaeology, pushing further, uncovers cities 10 or 12,000 years old at most. Beyond that, the record thins, fragmenting into scattered campsites, stone tools, and cave art. Yet anatomically modern humans have existed for at least 200 years, perhaps longer. That leaves an ocean of time, a vast silence in which entire chapters of human experience may have risen and fallen, leaving only the faintest of traces. Consider this: less than a fraction of Earth's surface has been systematically excavated. Most potential sites are buried, eroded, or inaccessible. Even on land, civilizations can vanish almost without a footprint. The Indus Valley, once home to tens of thousands, was only rediscovered in the 20th century, hidden beneath layers of silt. Great cities in the Amazon remained unknown until satellite imagery revealed geometric earthworks cut into the forest floor. What, then, might lie beneath the sea, where layers of sediment can be measured in kilometers? To doubt Atlantis is reasonable. To dismiss entirely the possibility of forgotten civilizations is less so. The ocean ensures that the record is incomplete. Absence of evidence, as the saying goes, is not evidence of absence. And perhaps that is why Atlantis continues to provoke debate. It represents not only one lost city, but the larger mystery of all that has been erased. If an entire continent's coastline was redrawn by melting glaciers, if valleys and river deltas now lie beneath the waves, then we must ask, who lived there, and what did they build? The tools of science have not yet given us clear answers. But the gaps themselves invite wonder. Think for a moment about the deep ocean floor. Beneath thousands of meters of water, there may be stone ridges that were once walls, now softened into shapes mistaken for geology. There may be pavements of cut blocks, hidden under shifting sands. There may be statues toppled long ago, entombed in silence. Or perhaps there is nothing, only the play of imagination, only the echo of Plato's story repeated for centuries. Both are possible, and both explain why Atlantis will not leave us. Mainstream archaeology stands cautious, grounded, skeptical. It has to. Science moves slowly, demanding proof that withstands doubt. And yet, human imagination is drawn toward mystery, toward the spaces where knowledge thins and wonder seeps in. In the case of Atlantis, those spaces are vast. Speculation is not science, but it is a spark. It allows us to ask, what if? What if a civilization once thrived along coasts now drowned? What if their temples, their harbors, their markets were swept away by rising seas? What if myth remembers what history forgot? These are not answers, but they are questions worth asking. And so, the problem of evidence remains. Atlantis is elusive because the sea is elusive, because time is relentless, because proof may lie buried too deep or may never have existed at all. But the absence of certainty does not quiet the story, it deepens it. It leaves us balanced between reason and wonder, between what we know and what we can only imagine, and that leads us forward. If sunken civilizations are so difficult to prove, then perhaps we must widen our perspective, looking not only for one lost city but for the conditions that make such loss possible. For the Earth itself has shifted dramatically since the Ice Age, reshaping coastlines, drowning lands, and leaving behind myths of floods remembered around the world. To understand the possibility of many Atlantises, we must begin with the changing Earth itself. The Earth you know tonight, its coastlines, its continents, the shape of its oceans is only the latest draft in a manuscript that has been rewritten again and again. To imagine the possibility of many lost civilizations, you have to picture a world that looked very different from the one you see on a map today. During the last ice age, the planet was colder, glaciers stretching across much of the northern hemisphere, locking away vast reservoirs of water in frozen sheets of ice. When that much water is trapped on land, the oceans recede. Sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters, coastlines advanced far outward. Where now there is water, then there was land. Imagine standing at the edge of what is now the North Sea, not seeing waves crashing against the shore, but endless plains stretching outward, rich with rivers and forests. That place was called Doggerland. It connected Britain to mainland Europe, a green and fertile land where people hunted, fished, and built homes. It was not an island then, but a heartland, a corridor of life. Now it lies beneath the waters of the North Sea, its rivers hidden, its settlements buried in silt. Only fragments remain, spear points dredged from fishing nets, bones of mammoths preserved in the mud, the faint outlines of hearths caught in sonar scans. A world that once thrived, erased by the rising tide. Far to the east, another drowned world stretched across what we now call Southeast Asia. Sundaland was not an archipelago of scattered islands, but a single vast landmass, a low plain connecting Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and the Malay Peninsula. At the height of the Ice Age, you could have walked across what is now ocean, through forests and rivers that no longer exist. Here, too, people lived. Archaeological evidence hints at migrations, tools, and early settlements. And then, as the ice melted, the sea returned, swallowing valleys, pushing people upward to the shrinking highlands that remain as today's islands. What myths survived in that region? Stories of floods, of gods who drowned the lowlands may carry memories of that loss. And in the north, there was Beringia, a bridge of land that once connected Siberia to Alaska. Not a narrow isthmus, but a wide expanse of tundra and steppe, home to herds of animals and the people who followed them. Through this corridor, humans spread into the Americas. Today it lies beneath the Bering Strait, invisible but not forgotten, a reminder of how the very ground beneath our ancestors' feet could vanish with a change in climate. These lands, Doggerland, Sunderland, Beringia, were not myths. They were real. They were home to human communities, perhaps even to the beginnings of complex cultures, all erased when the seas rose. If we know of them now, it is because of scattered remains, careful surveys, and hints left in the sediment. But they suggest something profound. Entire landscapes can be lost. Entire regions where civilizations might have flourished can disappear beneath the water, leaving little more than memory. Think of how fragile our own coastlines are. A few degrees of warming, a few centuries of melting, and great cities built at the ocean's edge could slip beneath the waves. New York, Shanghai, Mumbai, Lagos, names that today define the human story, could one day be as hidden as Doggerland, as silent as Sunderland. The lesson of the Ice Age is that Earth is not fixed. Geography shifts, continents wander, seas rise and fall. What looks permanent in a human lifetime is transient on the scale of the planet. And in those transitions, countless opportunities arise for civilizations to be forgotten. Picture walking through Sunderland 12,000 years ago, hearing the calls of birds in forests now drowned, feeling the ground firm beneath your feet where today ships cross the Java Sea. Picture living in Doggerland, fishing in rivers that no longer exist, building homes on plains that are now hidden beneath meters of salt water. Picture the hunters of Beringia, watching herds of mammoth pass across a land bridge that would one day vanish beneath icy waves. These were worlds as real as ours, and they are gone. What else might have been lost? If humans lived there, might they not have built settlements larger than we've yet uncovered? Could they have raised structures, left carvings, organized societies that disappeared with their lands? Archaeology struggles to answer, for the record is drowned, but the possibility remains. The earth is restless. It is always erasing and remaking itself. Every floodplain carries layers of forgotten villages. Every desert hides traces of rivers that once nourished life. And the oceans, which cover 70% of the globe, are the greatest vault of all, hiding not only shipwrecks, but perhaps whole chapters of human history. The shifting seas after the Ice Age were not gentle. They advanced rapidly in geological terms, meters per century in some places. Imagine generations watching the horizon creep closer, their fields and forests shrinking, their shrines drowned. Imagine the stories they told, of gods punishing the land, of floods that reshaped the world. Those stories survived in myth, passed down for millennia. The Sumerian flood, the biblical flood, the flood of Manu in Hindu tradition. The tales of deluge told by indigenous peoples across the globe all may be echoes of this shared memory of rising seas. The problem is not that we lack evidence of changing Earth. The problem is that the evidence is overwhelming, and much of it lies beneath waters we cannot easily explore. Doggerland and Sunderland remind us that the coasts we know are recent, temporary. The true shape of the continents has changed again and again, and with every change, something has been lost. Perhaps Atlantis, in Plato's telling, was not one city but the memory of many such drownings. Perhaps it was a way of saying, "We have seen lands disappear before, we will see them disappear again." The earth is not a stable stage on which civilization plays. It is a character itself, restless, dramatic, capable of shaping and destroying. Ice ages come and go, glaciers advance and retreat, seas flood and recede. Each time, human communities adapt, survive, migrate. But sometimes they vanish, and what remains is only silence, only the faint memory of a land that no longer exists. To imagine many Atlantises is to remember the changing earth. It is to see not only the cities that stand today, but the landscapes hidden below, waiting, perhaps, to be rediscovered. And so we move forward, from shifting geography to the stories people told to make sense of it. If entire coastlines drowned, if lands like Doggerland and Sunderland disappeared beneath the waves, how did ancient peoples remember? They remembered through myth, through tales of great floods that reshaped the world. And those myths, scattered across cultures, may be the strongest evidence we have that Earth has erased civilizations more than once. Long before archaeology unearthed bones and stones, long before geology mapped the seas, people told stories to remember what had been lost. And among the oldest and most enduring of those stories are the ones about water. Water that rises, water that drowns, water that resets the world. Nearly every culture that left its voice in myth speaks of a flood, and though the details differ, the theme is constant. A world undone by the sea, and life forced to begin again. Let us start in Mesopotamia, in the cradle of civilization where rivers shaped the land. The Sumerians told of Ziusudra, chosen by the gods to survive a flood that swept across the earth. Later, the Akkadians and Babylonians preserved a similar tale in the Epic of Gilgamesh. There, Utnapishtim builds a great vessel, gathers his family, and saves the seeds of life while storms rage for days. When the waters recede, he releases birds to find land, a detail that echoes across time into later traditions. The flood was not only punishment but also cleansing, a moment when the old world ended and a new one began. From there, the story traveled. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah builds his ark, guided by divine command, and the flood washes away corruption. 40 days and nights of rain, waters covering the mountains, and then the dove returning with an olive branch. It is both destruction and renewal, a cosmic reset button pressed by forces greater than humankind. In India, one finds the flood of Manu. The tale speaks of a tiny fish rescued by the first man, who later grows vast and warns him of a coming deluge. The fish, an avatar of Vishnu, guides Manu's boat through rising waters until the flood subsides, leaving him to repopulate the earth. Here again, destruction is paired with survival, chaos with continuity. Indigenous peoples across the world tell their own versions. In the Pacific Northwest, tribes speak of a time when the ocean surged inland, covering the land until only mountaintops remained. The Hopi of the American Southwest tell of previous worlds destroyed by floods before the present one was formed. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs believed an earlier age ended in water. The sun drowned and humanity remade. Aboriginal Australians carry oral histories of coastlines swallowed by the sea, stories that align with geological changes occurring more than 10,000 years ago. The sheer breadth of these myths is striking. How could so many cultures, separated by oceans, share a memory of cataclysm? To some, it is evidence of archetypal storytelling, water as the symbol of chaos, floods as a universal metaphor for renewal. But to others, it is more literal. These myths, they suggest, may be cultural memories of real events, passed down for millennia. Geology lends weight to this idea. At the end of the last ice age, as glaciers melted, sea levels rose dramatically. not slowly, not gently, but in surges. Meltwater pulses sent oceans advancing, swallowing coastlines in human lifetimes. What had been fertile plains became bays. What had been riverside settlements became seabeds. Imagine living through such a time, watching the horizon creep closer each year, watching storms eat away the land, listening to the ocean claim villages one by one. How would you remember it? You would tell your children of the flood. You would warn them with stories, and they would pass those stories on. Perhaps that is why flood myths endure with such detail, such urgency. They are not just metaphors, but memories. Memories of Doggerland slipping beneath the North Sea, of Sunderland dissolving into islands, of river valleys drowned by advancing tides. Memories so ancient they outlasted stone, carried in the rhythm of language instead of the permanence of walls. And here we reach speculation. If floods erased entire coastlines, if seas rose with such force, is it not possible that whole civilizations were lost, their names forgotten, their cities erased? Myths may be the only trace that survived. Perhaps Atlantis itself is just one version of a universal memory, one more retelling of humanity's confrontation with a world that can drown what it once gave. Think about the texture of myth itself. It does not preserve dates, but it preserves patterns. It does not list coordinates, but it names what mattered: survival, loss, renewal. And so, while archaeology struggles with absence, myth fills the silence with story. The problem is not that myth is unscientific, but that it remembers in ways science finds hard to measure. A myth may carry a memory 10,000 years old, yet it will never give us the exact shape of a city, the precise height of a wall. It whispers instead of sings, but still, it whispers. Picture the storytellers of ancient Mesopotamia, sitting by riverbanks as waters still flooded in spring, recounting how once the entire world had drowned. Picture the priests of India chanting hymns of Manu's survival. Picture elders along Pacific coasts pointing to high ground, telling children that long ago the sea rose higher than they could imagine. These stories are not just parables, they are warnings, woven into culture so that memory could survive even when evidence could not. And perhaps, if we listen, we begin to hear not just allegory but testimony. The earth itself has drowned worlds before. It may drown them again. Flood myths, then, become a bridge between history and prehistory, between geology and imagination. They do not prove Atlantis, nor do they disprove it. Instead, they remind us that Atlantis may not be alone, that many Atlantises may lie hidden, erased yet remembered in the oldest stories humans still tell. From here, our path leads downward into what has already been found. For while many flood myths speak of vanished lands, there are also real cities we have uncovered, lying beneath the sea. Places like Pavlopetri, Dwarka, and Thonis Heraklion remind us that sometimes the line between myth and history is not as wide as we think. When myth alone feels too elusive, we can turn to the sea itself, for it has already revealed fragments of its hidden archives. Beneath shallow waters, archaeologists have discovered places that once thrived with life, trade, and worship, only to vanish into silence. These are not legends but ruins. Cities with walls, streets, and temples remind us that Atlantis is not alone in being lost. One such place lies off the coast of Greece, in the clear waters of the Peloponnese. Pavlopetri is its name today, though long ago it was something else, a bustling town of the Bronze Age. Just beneath the waves, only a few meters down, lies a ghostly grid of stone foundations. Streets intersect with precision, lined with houses, courtyards, and even what appears to be a central square. Archaeologists date it to at least 5,000 years ago, perhaps older. It is the oldest known submerged city in the world, and its preservation is astonishing. Walking along its lanes today, or rather, swimming above them, you can trace the same patterns of urban planning that later shaped classical Greece. Imagine families living there, cooking in hearths whose outlines still remain, trading goods in markets whose stalls now rest beneath sand. Pavlopetri was not destroyed in a single night of fire or flood. Instead, it was slowly claimed by the sea, likely through earthquakes and shifting tides. Over centuries, its streets filled with water until it was gone from memory. Only in 1967 did divers rediscover it, and only with careful study did the true scale of its cityscape emerge. Travel now, in your imagination, across continents to India, where the waves conceal another lost world, the city of Dwarka. In Hindu tradition, Dwarka was the fabled kingdom of Krishna, a city of splendor built on the western coast. Ancient texts describe palaces of gold, gates studded with jewels, streets where music and ritual echoed. For centuries, it was treated as legend, a tale from the Mahabharata rather than history. But in 2001, off the coast of Gujarat, sonar scans revealed geometric shapes beneath the water. Divers found stone walls, grids of streets, and artifacts that suggested the presence of an ancient settlement. Some structures have been dated to as early as 9,000 years ago, though this remains debated. Even the more conservative estimates still push back the timeline of urban India by millennia. Inscriptions and myths may have preserved a memory of Dwarka's grandeur, but it was the sea itself that kept its remains hidden until recently. Here, myth and archaeology overlap in haunting ways. A legendary city once dismissed as story, revealed to have roots in stone. Now, let us move westward again, to Egypt's Mediterranean coast, where divers in the late 20th century uncovered a city once thought entirely lost, Thonis Herakleion. For centuries, this was a place mentioned only in passing by ancient historians, a port city of Egypt's delta, where Greek and Egyptian cultures mingled. No one knew where it was, or even if it had truly existed. Then, in the 1990s, archaeologist Frank Goddio and his team discovered massive stone statues lying silent on the seabed, along with temples, docks, and colossal blocks that had once formed monumental gateways. Thonis Herakleion was more than a port. It was a vital hub of trade, a meeting point between civilizations. Gold coins, inscriptions, ships preserved in mud all tell of its importance. And yet it vanished beneath the sea, likely due to earthquakes and the liquefaction of Nile Delta soils, a process where the earth itself loses its solidity under stress. Over centuries, the city slowly slipped into the water, leaving only memories in text until divers restored its presence. What unites these cities, Pavlopetri, Dwarka, Thonis Herakleion, is not just that they are underwater, but that they remind us how fragile Permanence Island. Each was once alive with markets, temples, and voices. Each vanished into silence, hidden by the very element that sustained it, and each, when rediscovered, shifted our understanding of history. Think of Pavlopetri showing us that complex urban planning existed far earlier than we thought. Think of Dwarka challenging timelines, suggesting that Indian civilization may be older and more sophisticated than assumed. Think of Thonis Herakleion rewriting the geography of Egypt's past, proving that an entire metropolis could vanish and be forgotten. These are lessons written not in speculation but in stone. And yet, even as these discoveries ground us, they also feed wonder, for if 3 such cities have been found, how many more lie waiting beneath the waves? How many Pavlopetris, how many Dwarkas, how many Thonis Herakleions still rest in silence? Picture swimming above Pavlopetri's streets, the outlines of walls visible in the sand, fish drifting through rooms where families once lived. Picture the massive statues of Thonis Herakleion, toppled and half buried, staring with stone eyes through centuries of silt. Picture the contested ruins of Dwarka, where myth and archaeology converge, and where perhaps memory has preserved truth longer than stone. These cities are not Atlantis. They did not sink in a single night, nor did they command empires across oceans. But they prove a possibility. They show that civilizations can be lost, drowned, erased, and later found again. And they whisper that Atlantis may not be alone, that it may not be unique at all. Perhaps Atlantis is simply the best-known name in a much longer list, a symbol among many real examples of how water erases and how memory survives. From here, we must take another step into the uncertain, the debated, the controversial. For alongside the cities we know and can measure, there are sites that remain disputed. Places where stone shapes stir imagination, where divers and scientists argue over whether we are seeing nature's patterns or humanity's lost architecture. These two belong in the conversation, for they stretch the boundary between certainty and speculation. Not all ruins are as clear as streets traced in sand or statues lying silent on the seabed. Some emerge from the depths as puzzles, their forms straddling the line between geology and architecture, between natural process and human design. These are the sites that stir the most debate, because they invite us to ask not only what is this, but what if. One such place lies off the coast of Yonaguni, a small island at the far edge of Japan's Ryukyu archipelago. In 1986, a local diver exploring the seabed discovered massive stone formations unlike anything he had seen before. Rising from the depths were terraces and steps, vast rectangular blocks stacked with uncanny precision. Sharp angles cut into the stone seemed to suggest stairways and platforms. Some surfaces bore what looked like carvings, faint but deliberate. To those who saw the photographs, it looked like a sunken citadel, an underwater Machu Picchu. Archaeologists and geologists were quick to respond. Some argued that Yonaguni was nothing more than natural sandstone formations, fractured by tectonic movement and shaped by currents. The ocean, after all, has a talent for carving patterns that mimic design, basalt columns forming hexagonal pavements, limestone weathering into arches and towers. Yet others, including marine geologist Masaaki Kimura, insisted the site showed evidence of human modification. He pointed to what seemed like roadways, canals, and even a stone carving resembling a face. If his interpretation is correct, Yonaguni could be a monument at least 10,000 years old, predating known Japanese civilization by millennia. Imagine descending through clear water to see those terraces rising from the gloom, each level sharp and geometric, as though chiseled by intent. Imagine swimming along corridors that might once have been ceremonial walkways. Whether natural or human-made, the effect is the same. The feeling of standing at a threshold where certainty dissolves, where the line between stone and story blurs. Thousands of kilometers away, in the warm waters of the Bahamas, lies another enigma, the Bimini Road. In 1968, divers discovered a stretch of large, rectangular stones laid out in what seemed to be a paved pathway under the shallow sea near Bimini Island. The blocks, some as long as 4 meters, appeared to be carefully arranged, forming what looked like a road or wall extending into the distance. To some, it was clear evidence of a lost civilization. Writers pointed to Plato's Atlantis, noting that he had placed it beyond the Pillars of Heracles, out in the Atlantic. Could Bimini be a fragment of that vanished empire? The discovery ignited imaginations, drawing seekers and speculators from around the world. But once again, geologists urged caution. They argued that the stones were natural beach rock, fractured and aligned by currents and erosion. Nature, they said, could easily create such formations without human hands, and yet the pattern is hard to dismiss. Some stones fit together like paving slabs, others curve as though following a plan. Standing above them, one sees not random scatter but intention or the shadow of it. These sites, Yonaguni and Bimini, are caught in perpetual debate. Natural or artificial, monument or mirage. Science demands proof, and proof remains elusive. The stones will not confess their secrets easily. Yet even in their ambiguity, they serve a purpose. They remind us that the ocean floor is full of enigmas and that we have barely begun to read its script. Speculation lingers here. What if Yonaguni was once a city, now drowned by rising seas when the Ice Age ended? What if Bimini was part of a broader network of settlements, erased when coastlines shifted? If true, these ruins would not stand alone. They would join Doggerland, Sunderland, and Beringia as evidence that human history is layered deeper than we imagine, its earliest chapters drowned beneath the waves. But even if they are natural, they play another role. They remind us how easily nature can mimic design and how fragile our sense of certainty is when confronted with stone. A wave here, a fracture there, and geology becomes architecture in the human eye. Perhaps that too is a lesson, that we are pattern seekers, drawn to meaning in the raw material of the world. Picture yourself swimming above Yonaguni's great terraces, the water shimmering blue in the sunlight, fish darting through gaps that might once have been doorways. Picture standing above the Bimini Road, feeling the tug of currents while the blocks stretch into distance like the foundation of something long erased. Whether natural or artificial, both places whisper the same truth. The ocean holds secrets, and we are only beginning to listen. What binds these disputed sites together is not certainty but possibility. They remind us that the search for Atlantis or for any lost civilization is as much about imagination as it is about excavation. We may never know if Yonaguni was carved or if Bimini was paved, but the very act of asking, the very persistence of wonder, ensures that these places live on in story. And perhaps that is what matters most. For history is not only what is proven, it is also what is remembered, questioned, and dreamed. Disputed sites sit at the edge of knowledge, inviting us to step closer, to lean in, to consider what else might be hidden beneath the waves. From here, the imagination turns wider still, to lands that exist not only as disputed ruins but as entire continents of myth. Lemuria and Mu, names that once filled maps drawn not by explorers but by dreamers. To continue our journey, we must step into these vanished worlds of lore and ask whether they too preserve a memory of real lands the sea has claimed. There are places on maps that never were, and yet their names linger as if they belong to memory. Lemuria, Mu, vast continents once thought to stretch across the Indian and Pacific Oceans, imagined not by sailors with salt in their beards, but by scholars, mystics, and storytellers seeking to explain what science had not yet unraveled. These continents have vanished not only from the sea but also from the discipline of geography, and yet, in the imagination, they continue to shimmer. The story of Lemuria begins in the 19th century, in the age when naturalists were tracing the lines of evolution. Biologists noticed something puzzling. Fossils of lemurs and other species appeared in both Madagascar and India, yet seemed absent from Africa and the Middle East. The obvious bridges. How could this be? To solve the puzzle, zoologist Philip Sclater proposed a lost land, a continent that once connected Madagascar to India, a place where these species could have thrived before the seas rose and divided them. He called it Lemuria. Maps of the time began to feature this imagined land, stretching across the Indian Ocean like a bridge of memory. It explained more than just lemurs. It gave shape to a theory of ancient migration, of peoples and cultures connected across impossible distances. Before plate tectonics was understood, this was how scientists made sense of scattered evidence. But science moves forward. The theory of continental drift and later plate tectonics explained what Lemuria had once been invented to solve. Continents moved, oceans opened, species migrated not across sunken lands but shifting plates. Lemuria was erased from textbooks, yet it remained alive in another realm, the esoteric. Theosophists such as Helena Blavatsky embraced Lemuria as more than a biological bridge. In her writings, it became a cradle of humanity itself, home to an ancient race of beings whose wisdom shaped later civilizations. Lemuria was not merely a lost continent but a lost epoch, a golden age drowned and forgotten. Writers and mystics in the 19th and early 20th centuries embroidered the tale with detail, describing Lemurians as tall, spiritual beings, sometimes androgynous, sometimes semi-divine. They were said to have mastered energies we no longer understand, to have built civilizations now buried under miles of water. In the Pacific, a parallel story emerged, the legend of Mu, popularized by the 19th century writer Augustus Le Plongeon. Mu was claimed to be an enormous continent that once stretched across the Pacific Ocean, the birthplace of great civilizations that spread their wisdom to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Mesoamerica. Le Plongeon said he had deciphered Mayan glyphs that spoke of Mu, though modern linguists disagree. Still, the idea took hold, inspiring James Churchward in the early 20th century to publish books describing Mu in vivid detail, its people, its cities, its temples. According to Churchward, Mu was a paradise, a motherland of humanity itself. He spoke of a population of millions, of advanced knowledge in science and spirituality, all swept away by catastrophic earthquakes and volcanic upheaval. Nothing of Mu remained, he claimed, except for fragments in Polynesian myth, Mayan codices, and megalithic ruins scattered across the Pacific. To mainstream archaeology, both Lemuria and Mu are fictions, placeholders born from gaps in knowledge and embroidered by imagination. The oceans of the Indian and Pacific basins are deep, their floors shaped not by sunken continents, but by the slow churn of tectonic plates. There is no geological evidence for vast landmasses sinking whole into the sea within human memory. And yet, the allure persists. Why? Perhaps because these myths of vanished continents resonate with something older than 19th century speculation. Across the Pacific, indigenous peoples tell of lands swallowed by the ocean, islands that rose and fell, voyages undertaken to escape rising seas. In the Indian Ocean, oral traditions of coastal peoples recall ancient floods, storms, and lands lost beneath the tide. It is not difficult to imagine that stories of real drowned lands, smaller in scale, but devastating to those who lived there, were woven into the tapestry of Lemuria and Mu. Speculation invites us to soften the boundaries. What if Lemuria and Mu were not literal continents spanning oceans, but memories magnified? What if they preserve echoes of Sundaland, now beneath the seas of Southeast Asia, or of Pacific islands destroyed by volcanic eruptions and earthquakes? What if the myths of Mu carry the voices of seafarers who watched their homelands sink beneath the waves and passed the memory on until it was woven into legend? Picture a storyteller on a Pacific island, pointing to the horizon and speaking of a land that once lay there, now gone. Picture another on the shores of the Indian Ocean, recalling a time when land stretched farther, when villages now drowned thrived beneath a sun no less bright than ours. Over centuries, these memories expand, becoming continents in the imagination, vast motherlands of forgotten wisdom. Even if Lemuria and Mu never existed as continents, they may still point to truths. They remind us that human beings have always sensed the instability of the earth beneath their feet, that we have always sought to explain the losses that water brings. They reveal how myth and science intertwine. Where evidence ends, story begins. And perhaps, just perhaps, they are not entirely wrong. For while plate tectonics dismisses the idea of whole continents vanishing in recent millennia, it does not deny that coastlines have drowned, Islands have collapsed, volcanoes have sunk land into the sea. The difference is one of scale. Science says no to the vastness of Lemuria and Mu, but yes to the many smaller lands that inspired such myths. So, when we hear the names Lemuria and Mu, we should listen not for geography, but for memory. They are names for a feeling that the ocean hides more than it reveals, that civilizations can be erased, that what is lost is never entirely forgotten. They are reminders that even mistakes in science can open doors in imagination, doors that lead us back to the same haunting question: how many Atlantises have there been? And this question leads us northward into the realm of ice and myth, where Greeks and Norse alike spoke of Hyperborea and shining lands at the edge of the world. For if Lemuria and Mu belong to the oceans of the south and west, Hyperborea belongs to the north, where snow and ice may have hidden worlds of their own. The ancients often looked northward with a kind of reverence, as though the pole itself held secrets beyond ordinary reach. Where the Mediterranean was familiar, mapped by sailors and marked by empires, the north was a land of rumor, cold, distant, luminous. In Greek thought, it was Hyperborea, a place beyond the north wind, where the sun shone in endless summer and people lived free of sickness and strife. The very name comes from hyper, meaning beyond, and Boreas, the god of the north wind. Hyperborea was not a wasteland of ice, but a paradise hidden at the edge of the known world. Herodotus wrote of it in fragments, claiming that offerings to Apollo were sent from Hyperborea, carried by sacred maidens. Pindar described its people as long-lived, celebrating their lives in music and dance, untouched by war or age. For the Greeks, Hyperborea was not just geography but a vision of perfection, a shining land where humanity could thrive in harmony with the divine. Yet they placed it at the very edge of possibility, somewhere inaccessible, beyond rivers and mountains, hidden behind the cold breath of Boreas. To the Norse, too, the far north held mysteries. In their myths, shining halls stood at the edge of the icy world. Asgard and Jotunheim were places of gods and giants, but farther still, legends spoke of lands now unreachable, swallowed by shifting ice. Saga and song carried memories of voyages across stormy seas toward Greenland and beyond, whispers of Vinland and other coasts. But beneath those tales may lie deeper layers, a sense that lands once open and habitable became locked in frost, erased not by waves but by glaciers. Even in more recent lore, echoes of shining polar cities persist. Medieval cartographers, uncertain about the true shape of the world, filled their maps of the Arctic with islands that later explorers never found. Renaissance mystics imagined Ultima Thule, a radiant land at the northern edge of the earth, both a destination and a symbol of what lies beyond. In some esoteric traditions, the North Pole itself was seen as a gateway, a hidden entrance to subterranean realms, home to advanced beings waiting beneath the ice. What fascinates is not only the beauty of these myths but their persistence. Across cultures and centuries, the poles were rarely seen as barren. They were seen as places of mystery, of potential, of hidden light. Why? Perhaps because in the memory of humanity, the poles have changed. During the Ice Age, vast glaciers extended far south. Regions that are frozen tundra now were once habitable plains. And as the ice retreated, seas rose, reshaping the world again. It is not impossible to imagine that communities once thrived in regions now locked beneath permafrost or buried under glaciers. Speculation invites a question. Could entire cultures have been erased by the shifting ice? Unlike floods, which leave traces in silt and sand, ice grinds everything beneath it, crushing stone, scattering debris. A settlement swallowed by glaciers would vanish almost completely, leaving only the faintest geological scars. When we think of lost civilizations, we often picture them drowned by the sea. But ice is just as ruthless an eraser. Picture standing at the edge of a glacier, listening to the deep groan of ice as it shifts and cracks. Imagine beneath that frozen mass the remains of a village, wooden beams splintered, hearthstones scattered, carvings worn down by centuries of pressure. Nothing visible remains, yet the memory survives in myth: a shining land, a people blessed, a paradise hidden beyond the wind. Hyperborea, perhaps, is not entirely invention. It could be the magnified memory of lands that vanished under snow. The same applies to the southern pole. Antarctica today is a continent of ice, but beneath that ice lies stone, valleys, mountains, and lakes. In warmer ages of the planet, Antarctica was green, forested, alive with rivers. Could it have been home to human communities before the ice claimed it? Mainstream science places the great glaciation of Antarctica far earlier than human civilization. And yet, maps like the Piri Reis, drawn in the 16th century, seem to depict parts of its coastline free of ice, leading some to speculate whether ancient navigators once glimpsed a different southern world. Whether north or south, the poles invite speculation because they are places we cannot easily reach, places that hold their secrets tightly. The ice both preserves and conceals. It may hold untouched records of the past, waiting to be revealed as glaciers melt and technology advances. Or it may have obliterated entire worlds, leaving only myth to carry the memory forward. Think again of the Greeks, imagining Hyperborea not as an icy wasteland but as a land of light, a golden age hidden from ordinary eyes. Think of the Norse, placing radiant halls at the edge of frozen seas. Think of cartographers sketching islands into blank spaces on maps, unwilling to leave the poles empty. All of them, in their own way, gave shape to the intuition that something lies hidden where the world seems most silent. And perhaps they were right. Not in the literal sense of a sunlit paradise at the pole, but in the deeper sense that the earth has always hidden as much as it reveals. That civilizations, however fragile, have risen in places now unrecognizable, their voices preserved only as echoes in story. From the shining cities of Hyperborea to the mythic lands of Ultima Thule, the theme remains the same. We imagine what has been erased. And in doing so, we keep alive the possibility that history is larger, older, and stranger than the fragments we hold. As we move forward, the question of lost civilizations leads us not only into myth but into the raw forces of the planet itself. For if lands can be drowned by sea or crushed by ice, they can also be shattered by fire and quake. The Earth is not a passive stage, but an actor, and catastrophe has always been its most dramatic role. The Earth has always spoken in sudden violence. Beneath the slow rhythms of growth and decay, beneath the steady turning of seasons, there is a pulse of upheaval. Mountains rise not gently but in shuddering moments of strain released. Coastlines are redrawn not only by centuries of tide, but by a single wave surging higher than any before. Civilizations, built in the faith that the ground beneath will hold steady, are reminded again and again that the earth is restless and that its quiet masks enormous power. Consider earthquakes. They come without warning, the ground itself trembling as if it has remembered something long forgotten. In seconds, homes and temples fall, rivers shift course, mountainsides crumble. Entire cities can be undone before their inhabitants understand what has happened. For those who survive, the memory is etched forever not just in the cracks of stone, but in the stories told to the next generation. The ground is not fixed, the earth can open. Then there are tsunamis, born often from the same hidden fractures. An earthquake beneath the sea, a landslide plunging into the deep, a volcanic flank collapsing into water, all can unleash waves taller than buildings, waves that race across oceans with the speed of a jet. When they reach shore, they do not politely rise, they engulf. The coast becomes a graveyard, the familiar drowned in salt. Survivors climb hills, clinging to stories of angry gods or divine warnings. And again, myth carries memory forward. The sea once came for us, and it may come again. Volcanoes, too, remind us of catastrophe's role in human history. They do not whisper, they roar. Fire rises from the earth's core, molten stone breaking through the crust, ash blotting out the Sunday. Entire landscapes can be buried in hours. To stand near an eruption is to feel both awe and terror, to know that the same planet that gives life can take it away in flame. Perhaps the most famous example of volcanic destruction is the eruption of Thera on the island we now call Santorini. Around 1600 BCE, a colossal explosion tore the island apart, sending ash high into the sky and waves across the Aegean. The eruption was one of the largest in recorded history. It devastated the island, destroyed settlements, and likely sent shockwaves across the Mediterranean. Many scholars believe this catastrophe contributed to the decline of the Minoan civilization on Crete, a culture of extraordinary artistry and seafaring power. Palaces at Knossos and elsewhere may not have fallen in that single moment, but the chain of disasters set in motion by Thera, earthquakes, tsunamis, famine, political unrest may have unraveled their world. Imagine standing on a Minoan harbor, watching the horizon darken as a wave taller than the city walls surges toward shore. Imagine the sky raining ash, the air thick, the sun dimmed for months. For a people whose lives were tied to the sea, such an event would have been not only physical destruction, but spiritual disorientation. The gods themselves must have seemed to turn against them. And perhaps this memory lingers in Plato's tale of Atlantis, not as a literal account of Crete, but as an echo of civilizations undone by catastrophe. History is full of smaller examples too. Pompeii and Herculaneum, towns buried in AD 79 by the eruption of Vesuvius, their streets frozen in time under ash. Entire islands in the Pacific obliterated by volcanic blasts. Cities along fault lines crumbled by earthquakes. Lisbon in 1755, flattened and burned by quake and fire, reshaping European philosophy as much as geography. Catastrophe is not an exception. It is a recurring verse in the song of human history. And it is cyclical. Each time, people rebuild, often on the very same fault lines, in the shadow of the same volcano, by the edge of the same ocean. We are drawn to fertile volcanic soils, to rivers made navigable by tectonic valleys, to coasts where trade thrives. The very forces that destroy also create. But this cycle ensures that civilizations remain vulnerable, always one tremor, one eruption, one wave away from erasure. Speculation brings us to a haunting thought. How many catastrophes have erased civilizations so completely that we no longer remember their names? The Minoans we know because fragments survived. Pompeii we know because ash preserved it. But what of those who built in earlier ages, before writing, before history, whose towns and temples left no record after the fire and wave consumed them? Their stories may linger only as myths of gods striking down cities, of seas rising without mercy, of lands vanishing in smoke. Think of Atlantis again, described as falling in a single day and night. To us, that sounds like allegory. But to those who watched Thera erupt, to those who watched waves consume harbors, it may have been the truest way to describe reality. The earth moves swiftly when it decides to erase. Picture yourself walking through a quiet ruin, stone walls toppled, streets buried in ash. Imagine the silence after catastrophe, when the voices are gone, when only the wind moves through what remains. That silence is part of our history, just as much as the cities still standing. Civilizations rise, flourish, and fall, and catastrophe is often the hand that writes the final line. And yet, catastrophe is also renewal. Volcanic ash fertilizes soil, Earthquakes carve new landscapes that rivers will later enrich. Tsunamis reshape coasts that future generations will inhabit. The cycle is merciless but creative. Civilizations vanish, but life continues, and new civilizations rise. In this way, catastrophe becomes a teacher, reminding us of fragility, of impermanence, of the thin line between flourishing and collapse. It is no coincidence that so many myths carry stories of fire, flood, and quake. They are not only memories of disaster but warnings. To ignore them is to risk repeating what others endured. As we reflect on cataclysms, one particular moment in deep history calls to us a period when climate itself shifted violently, reshaping the world in ways that may have erased not one but many civilizations at once. This is the mystery of the Younger Dryas, a sudden cooling around 800 years ago, when fire and ice may have rewritten human destiny. Roughly 800 years ago, the Earth shuddered into a new chapter, one written not in the slow hand of millennia, but in the sharp strokes of catastrophe. Just as the Ice Age seemed to be ending, with glaciers retreating and climates softening, the world was thrust abruptly back into cold. For more than 1,000 years, temperatures dropped across much of the northern hemisphere. This sudden reversal is known as the Younger Dryas, named after a hardy Arctic flower that spread during the chill. To those who lived then, it must have felt as though the earth itself had turned against them, as though spring had been promised, then stolen. The causes of this dramatic cooling are still debated. One theory suggests that the collapse of massive ice sheets released torrents of fresh water into the oceans, disrupting currents that carried warmth northward. Another points to volcanic eruptions, filling the skies with ash and aerosols that dimmed the sunday. And then there is the most controversial hypothesis of all, that fragments of a comet or asteroid struck the Earth, igniting wildfires across continents, filling the atmosphere with soot, and plunging the planet back into a sudden, icy winter. Whatever the cause, the effects were immense. Megafauna that had roamed for millennia, mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths dwindled into extinction. Ecosystems shifted, forcing human populations to adapt or perish. Some scholars argue that the sudden shock may have spurred new forms of resilience, pushing communities toward agriculture, settlement, and eventually, civilization itself. Others suggest the opposite, that cultures already rising in sophistication may have been swept away, their traces buried under flood and frost. Consider the evidence found at sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Here, monumental stone enclosures were erected around 600 years ago, at the very end of the Younger Dryas. The precision and artistry of these megaliths suggest a sophistication that seems to appear suddenly, as though memory of earlier knowledge had survived catastrophe and been put into stone before it could vanish again. Some researchers wonder, were the builders carrying forward fragments of a world erased during the Younger Dryas? The comet hypothesis fuels such speculation. Proponents point to layers of microscopic spherules, high levels of platinum, and widespread charcoal deposits in sediments dating to 800 years ago. These, they argue, could be signatures of cosmic impacts, fire raining from the sky, igniting forests, darkening skies. If true, the Younger Dryas may have been not just a shift of climate, but a disaster of global scale, erasing cultures before history had the chance to remember their names. Imagine the world through the eyes of those who lived then. Rivers swelled with sudden floods as ice sheets melted. Skies darkened with smoke, stars hidden, sun dimmed. Seasons turned erratic, winters colder, summers short and uncertain. Herds of animals vanished, hunting grounds failed, familiar patterns collapsed. For a people without writing, without the permanence of record, how would such events be remembered? Likely through stories of floods, of fire, of angry gods striking the world. Perhaps the great flood myths that echo through so many cultures are not only about rising seas, but also about this sudden chaos when the earth itself seemed to crack. Speculation stretches further. If humans had begun to organize into complex societies before the Younger Dryas, could those societies have been erased in a single span of centuries, leaving behind only faint hints? Archaeology tells us that the Holocene, the era after the Younger Dryas, is when agriculture and permanent settlements blossomed. But what if the Holocene was also a second beginning, a recovery from a world undone? If so, the ruins of that earlier age may lie buried beneath floodplains, ground down by glaciers, or hidden under oceans swollen by meltwater. The Younger Dryas reminds us that climate is not a gentle backdrop. It can shift suddenly, rewriting the possibilities of life. To our ancestors, this was no theory but daily reality. They endured it, adapted, survived. Yet survival may have come at the cost of forgetting of entire cultures erased before their stories could be carved into stone. Picture a village at the edge of a glacier, its people watching as fire streaks across the night sky. Days later, smoke veils the horizon. Rivers rise, crops fail, winters stretch longer. Within generations, the village is gone, its name unspoken, its memory surviving only as a warning in myth. Beware the flood, beware the fire, beware the ice. Science seeks certainty, and the Younger Dryas remains an open question. Was it triggered by celestial impact, by oceans disrupted, by volcanic fury? We may never know fully. But what we do know is that it reshaped the course of life on Earth. Extinctions, migrations, transformations all carry the fingerprint of this sudden return to ice. And for those who ask whether Atlantis was possible, whether many Atlantises may have existed, the Younger Dryas offers a chilling reminder. Civilization is not guaranteed. Climate can turn swiftly. Catastrophe can erase not just cities, but whole ways of life, leaving only shadows behind. In the silence of that thousand-year chill, we glimpse the fragility of memory, the vulnerability of human achievement, and the possibility that before the world we know, there were others lost, not because they were mythical, but because they were mortal. As all civilizations are, as we step forward, we leave behind the ice and fire of climate catastrophe and turn toward the evidence of survival. For even after the Younger Dryas, humans built again. They raised stones at Göbekli Tepe, they carved monuments, they remembered in ways that endure. To understand the depth of this mystery, we must now look closer at those earliest stones and ask whether they preserve the voices of civilizations older than we thought possible. On a hill in southeastern Turkey, beneath layers of soil that had hidden it for thousands of years, lies a place that has quietly rewritten our understanding of human history. It is called Göbekli Tepe, the Potbelly Hill, though its true weight is not in the earth that covers it, but in the questions it raises. For here, in stones set upright 12,000 years ago, we glimpse a sophistication that should not have existed, not according to the timelines we once believed. The site was first noted in the 1960s, but only excavated in earnest decades later. What emerged was astonishing. Vast circular enclosures, each framed by massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons. The stones are carved with intricate images, foxes, snakes, birds, lions, abstract symbols that still resist interpretation. These were not crude scratches, but deliberate, stylized art. The stones themselves were not dragged into place casually. They required planning, coordination, and the labor of hundreds, perhaps thousands. The shock lies in the date. Radiocarbon analysis places Göbekli Tepe around 9,600 BCE, at the very threshold of the Holocene, immediately after the Younger Dryas. This was a time when mainstream archaeology assumed humans were still scattered hunter-gatherers, surviving in small bands without the social organization to build on such a scale. And yet, here are monumental structures older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years, older than the pyramids by 7,000. Imagine standing among those pillars, the carvings catching torchlight in the night, shadows of animals flickering across stone. Imagine the sound of rituals performed there, chants echoing in the circle, stars wheeling above. This was not a village, not a settlement with houses and streets. It seems to have been a temple, a ceremonial center, a place where people gathered from afar. The implication is profound. Organized religion, symbolic art, and architectural ambition existed before agriculture, before cities, before the very things we once thought were necessary for civilization. Göbekli Tepe unsettles our linear view of progress. We once pictured humanity as moving step by step, first tools, then farming, then villages, then monuments. But Göbekli Tepe inverts the sequence. Here are monuments, first vast communal projects, suggesting that perhaps it was ritual, not agriculture, that pulled people together, that sparked the birth of society. The stones seem to whisper, our ancestors were not as simple as we thought. And this raises another question. Was Göbekli Tepe truly the beginning, or was it the echo of something older? Could its builders have inherited knowledge from a culture erased in the Younger Dryas, carrying fragments of memory forward into stone? Some archaeologists caution against such speculation. They point out that human creativity can leap forward in surprising ways, and that the leap at Göbekli Tepe may have been independent. But the timing, so soon after a period of catastrophe, invites wonder. It suggests survival, adaptation, even remembrance. Think of the skill required to carve those pillars. The artistry suggests a long tradition of symbolism and meaning, not something invented overnight. Where are the earlier sites that might have led to this? Were they lost to floodplains, buried beneath silt, or drowned along shifting coasts? Or has Göbekli Tepe survived simply because its builders deliberately buried it, preserving it for reasons we still do not understand? Speculation grows richer when we notice that Göbekli Tepe was not a single circle, but dozens, spread across the hill, layered over centuries. Its builders returned again and again, raising new enclosures, reworking old ones, extending their vision across generations. This was not a fleeting experiment. It was a sustained effort, suggesting cultural depth, continuity, and meaning far beyond mere survival. Picture the labor involved. Stones cut from quarries with flint tools, transported across the hill, lifted upright by ropes and human strength. Hundreds of people cooperating, organizing food, water, shelter. In an age before farming, how was this sustained? Did they gather seasonally, forming temporary societies around ritual? Did networks of groups converge, united by belief, building monuments as symbols of shared identity? Such questions linger because Göbekli Tepe does not fit neatly into what we expect. It stands outside the frame, a reminder that history is not a straight line but a labyrinth. And like all labyrinths, it may conceal forgotten chambers' earlier attempts, lost cultures, precursors erased by fire, flood, or time. Speculative voices suggest that Göbekli Tepe may preserve whispers of an older civilization, one that flourished before the Younger Dryas and was undone by it. The survivors, they say, carried fragments of knowledge into the New Age, encoding memory into stone so it would not be lost again. Mainstream scholars are cautious, yet even they admit that Göbekli Tepe forces a re-evaluation of what humans were capable of so early. Whether independent or inherited, the site is a puzzle. It suggests that human creativity, cooperation, and symbolism ran deeper into time than we imagined. It asks us to reconsider what we mean by civilization. Perhaps it is not the presence of cities and farms, but the urge to build together, to carve meaning into stone, to gather in shared spaces beneath the sky. And so, Göbekli Tepe becomes a threshold. On one side, the story of humanity as simple hunters, only later discovering the complexities of culture. On the other, the possibility that culture came first, that ritual and story were the seeds from which cities grew. And in that threshold, the possibility remains open. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was not the first, but the last surviving chapter of a much older book now lost to flood, ice, and fire. From here, the path widens. Göbekli Tepe is not alone. Around the world, stones stand in circles, pyramids rise in desert sands, and walls of colossal blocks stretch across mountains. These megaliths, scattered across continents, raise a haunting question. Are they independent inventions or echoes of a deeper, forgotten tradition? Everywhere on Earth, stones rise where people once gathered. Some stand alone on windswept plains, others are stacked into pyramids that scrape the horizon, and still others are fitted into walls so vast and precise that even now we marvel at how they were built. These are megaliths, great stones raised by human hands. Their presence is universal, appearing on every inhabited continent, across oceans, across cultures, across ages. And that universality invites a question that has never quite left us. Are these monuments separate inventions, born independently in distant lands? Or are they faint echoes of something older, a memory carried across generations, perhaps even across forgotten civilizations? Let us begin with the stone circles. In Britain, Stonehenge rises from the Salisbury Plain, its trilithons aligned with the movements of the sun, marking solstices with unerring precision. To stand there at dawn in midsummer is to see sunlight threading through stone, connecting sky and earth in a way that feels timeless. But Britain is not alone. Across Europe, circles of stone stand in Brittany, in Portugal, in Scandinavia. In Africa too, the Senegambian stone circles mark the land, and in the Middle East, Jordan's Wheel of Giants sprawls across the desert. Each circle is different, yet all share a fascination with alignment, with the cosmos, with marking time in stone. Then there are the pyramids. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza towers as a testament to planning and power, its geometry so precise that its sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal points. In Mesoamerica, pyramids rise in stepped forms, Teotihuacan's Pyramid of the Sun, Chichen Itza's Kukulkan, each aligned with celestial events. In China, earthen pyramids still stand near Xi'an, hidden for centuries under vegetation. Even in Sudan, the pyramids of Meroe dot the desert, built by the Kushite kings. The form repeats, a mountain made by human hands, a stairway of stone reaching toward the sky. And beyond circles and pyramids, we find walls. In Peru, at Sacsayhuaman, blocks of stone weighing over 100 tons fit together with such precision that not even a blade of grass can slip between them. The Cyclopean walls of the Mycenaeans in Greece bear similar grandeur, built of stones so large that later generations believed only giants could have placed them. Across the world, from the basalt moai platforms of Easter Island to the stone terraces of Nan Madol in Micronesia, human beings moved and raised monoliths in ways that still challenge imagination. Why this global impulse to raise megaliths? One explanation is simple. Stone endures, wood rots, clay crumbles, but stone remains. Perhaps all cultures discovered this truth and turned to stone as a medium for memory, power, and ritual. Another explanation is symbolic. Stone is the earth itself, eternal and unyielding, a material that connects humanity with the cosmos. Each culture may have found its own path to this same revelation. Yet speculation draws us deeper. The similarities are striking. Why do so many megaliths align with the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars? Why do so many take forms that echo one another? Pyramids, circles, terraces. Could it be coincidence? A convergence of human creativity facing similar challenges? Or could it be something more, the echo of a shared tradition, perhaps older than recorded history, carried by survivors of forgotten worlds? Some theorists imagine that after the Younger Dryas, survivors of earlier civilizations spread knowledge to new peoples, knowledge of stone, of alignment, of the cosmos. Myths of teacher gods tell of strangers arriving after floods, bringing arts, laws, and sciences. Perhaps the megaliths are their legacy, scattered fragments of a lost whole. Mainstream archaeology urges caution here, reminding us that independent invention is a powerful force. But the resonance of these monuments still stirs curiosity. Picture standing in the shadow of Stonehenge, feeling the same chill wind that brushed the faces of those who raised it 5,000 years ago. Picture walking up the steps of a Mayan pyramid, the same sun striking the stone just as it did in ceremonies long past. Picture touching the fitted blocks of Sacsayhuaman, their surfaces smoothed by hands that believed in their permanence. These moments feel connected, as if separated not by oceans but by memory. The mystery of megaliths is not only how they were built, but why. They required effort beyond necessity. Hunters and farmers could have lived without raising stones weighing tons, yet they chose to. They gathered, organized, labored. They aligned their monuments with celestial cycles that spanned generations. This devotion suggests that megaliths were more than architecture. They were statements of identity, of continuity, of connection to forces greater than humanity. Speculation lingers here, gentle but insistent. What if megaliths are the fingerprints of multiple lost civilizations? What if survivors carried their traditions from drowned coasts to new lands, seeding memory in stone wherever they went? Even if not literally true, the thought itself carries a kind of poetry that the world's oldest monuments are fragments of a dialogue between civilizations, separated by oceans, but united by the urge to endure. In the end, megaliths remind us that history is layered. Each stone circle, each pyramid, each wall stands as both evidence and enigma. They are proof of human ingenuity, but they also gesture towards something larger, something we still struggle to name. And so the question deepens: were these megaliths independent sparks of brilliance, or are they embers from fires that once burned brighter in civilizations now forgotten? From this mystery of stone, we turn naturally to the myths that surround it. Myths of teachers who arrived after floods, who brought knowledge to humanity, who may themselves have been the last survivors of earlier worlds. Across cultures, scattered across continents and separated by oceans, there are stories of figures who came not as conquerors but as teachers. They appear after times of destruction, emerging when humanity seems most vulnerable, bringing with them the seeds of knowledge: how to plant, how to build, how to measure the heavens, how to live under law. They are often described as strangers, arriving from the sea, marked by unusual appearance or uncanny wisdom. Some call them gods, others culture heroes, but the pattern is striking. In every telling, they are remembered as givers, the ones who restored what had been lost. In Mesoamerica, one such figure is Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. He is said to have descended not to demand worship, but to teach. Myths tell of him bringing maize to the people, teaching agriculture, arts, and the reckoning of time. He was associated with Venus, the morning star, a symbol of cycles and renewal. Some accounts even describe him as a tall, bearded figure, unusual in the native context, who arrived from across the sea. In certain traditions, he departed again, promising to return. Whether god or man, Quetzalcoatl is remembered not for destruction, but for wisdom. Farther south, in the Andes, we encounter Viracocha, the great creator god of the Inca. According to legend, Viracocha emerged after a flood, that had destroyed an earlier age. He wandered the land in human form, teaching laws, arts, and crafts to the scattered survivors. He too was described as an unusual figure, sometimes clothed in white, sometimes bearing a staff. He journeyed from place to place, restoring order before walking out across the Pacific, vanishing into the horizon. For the Andean peoples, Viracocha was both divine and deeply human, a teacher who appeared when needed, who ensured that knowledge survived. And in Mesopotamia, at the dawn of recorded history, there is the tale of Oannes. Described by the Babylonian priest Berosus, Oannes emerged from the sea, part man, part fish, during the day to teach humanity agriculture, writing, architecture, and law. At night he returned to the depths. He did not destroy but instructed, laying the foundations for civilization itself. His story is peculiar in detail yet familiar in theme. Wisdom coming from the sea, survival gifted by a figure who appears in a time of need. What unites these stories is their timing. Each follows catastrophe. Each occurs after a flood. Each begins in an era when humanity is fragile and scattered. Into this vulnerability steps a teacher bringing the tools that turn survival into civilization. The parallels are difficult to ignore. Speculation blooms here. Could these myths preserve memories not just of divine figures, but of survivors, human survivors from earlier worlds? If a civilization once thrived before floods and ice erased it, might its remnants have carried knowledge forward, teaching scattered communities how to rebuild? To those who received their guidance, they would have seemed godlike, possessing skills and traditions unfamiliar and profound. Over time, memory would magnify them into deities, their human flaws forgotten, their gifts enshrined. Imagine the scene. A small community, reeling from flood or famine, watches as strangers arrive by sea. The strangers carry tools, seeds, and strange knowledge of the stars. They show how to cultivate crops, how to build more lasting shelters, how to measure time by celestial cycles. To the community, these gifts are miracles. To the strangers, they may simply be fragments of memory knowledge preserved from a civilization now gone. In such an encounter, myth is born. The pattern repeats globally. Polynesian traditions speak of ancestral navigators arriving from distant lands, bringing order and skill. The Dogon of Mali preserve myths of beings who came from the stars, but some interpret these as memories of seafarers arriving by water. Even the Greeks spoke of Prometheus, who brought fire, a symbol of knowledge to humanity, at great cost. Always the theme is the same. A teacher arrives, civilization follows. Mainstream archaeology explains these parallels in other ways. Myths, they suggest, reflect universal human concerns. Floods, agriculture, the sky, these are experiences all cultures share, and so stories naturally echo across distance. There is truth in this. Yet the uncanny repetition of the teacher figure arriving after catastrophe, often from the sea, invites us to pause. Could it be more than coincidence? Speculation does not demand certainty. It simply asks, what if? What if Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, and Oannes were not inventions of imagination, but distant memories of real people carrying knowledge across a fractured world? What if they were the last voices of civilizations erased by flood and fire, determined to ensure that something of their world survived in the next? The imagery of the sea is particularly telling. The teachers come from the water or return to it. The ocean is both their pathway and their veil. Perhaps this reflects the truth that those who arrived by ship seem to come from the infinite horizon, from realms unknown. Or perhaps it is deeper, an acknowledgement that the ocean itself had swallowed the world they left behind. Picture Quetzalcoatl departing across the eastern sea, Viracocha walking into the Pacific, Oannes sinking back into the depths. each returns to the element that both erased and concealed. The sea holds not only their origin, but their silence. In this way, myths of teacher gods bridge the gap between archaeology and imagination. They remind us that knowledge does not always emerge slowly in place. Sometimes it arrives suddenly, mysteriously, from elsewhere. And whether divine or human, these figures symbolize continuity, the thread that carries wisdom across ages, even when civilizations collapse. And so we are left with a haunting possibility. Perhaps humanity's story is not linear, but cyclical. Perhaps each great age inherits fragments from the one before, carried by survivors who become remembered as gods. If true, then Atlantis was not alone nor final. It was one among many worlds, each rising, each falling, each leaving behind teachers who seeded the next. From here, our journey turns to the cycles themselves, to the rise and fall of civilizations, the repeating rhythm of creation and collapse. For the myths of teachers are only part of the pattern. The larger truth is that civilizations themselves move in cycles, just as the earth does, and Atlantis may be but one verse in an eternal refrain. History, when viewed up close, looks like progress tools sharpen, cities grow, knowledge accumulates. But when we step back, when we look not at centuries but millennia, a different pattern emerges. Civilizations do not simply climb upward in steady ascent. They rise, they flourish, and they fall. Each collapse scatters memory, and yet fragments endure, carried into the next age like embers from a fire. The rhythm is not linear but cyclical, like the turning of seasons or the waxing of the moon. We see this in the civilizations we know. Ancient Sumer, the first great urban experiment, carved canals and wrote in clay, only to fade as new powers rose along the same rivers. Egypt, mighty for thousands of years, passed through ages of unity and disunity, brilliance and decline, each dynasty a crest in a longer wave. The Maya raised pyramids in forests, charted Venus in the sky, and then abandoned their great cities, leaving them to vines and silence. Rome itself vast, ordered, seemingly eternal, fractured into ruin, its stones repurposed, its roads leading into darkness before new kingdoms emerged. Each time, people believed their world would last forever. Each time, catastrophe or slow decline proved otherwise. Yet knowledge survived, sometimes in texts, sometimes in oral traditions, sometimes only in myth. The cycles are not perfect repetitions, but echoes. Every collapse leaves seeds that germinate in the next age. And perhaps this pattern extends deeper than we remember. If Atlantis was real, it may have been one in a long chain of forgotten ages, civilizations erased by sea, fire, or ice, leaving behind only whispers. Plato's story may not stand alone, but as one preserved fragment of a truth larger than history, that humanity has risen and fallen many times before. Speculation here is gentle but insistent. Imagine a civilization flourishing on coasts now drowned, raising cities, charting stars, weaving myths of gods. Then imagine the seas rising, the earth shifting, catastrophe undoing their work in a single lifetime. Survivors scatter inland, carrying fragments of knowledge. They tell their children stories of what once was, stories that become myths of golden ages. Centuries later, when they raise new monuments, they may not remember the details, but they remember enough to look at the stars, to honor the cycles, to fear the flood. Perhaps this is why so many cultures speak of ages, not just years. The Greeks divided time into golden, silver, bronze, and iron. The Hindus speak of yugas, vast cycles of rise and decline. The Maya charted Baktuns, immense spans in which worlds were born and destroyed. Always the pattern is the same. Greatness followed by collapse, memory carried forward into the next dawn. Atlantis, then, may not be unique. It may be the most famous name for a universal truth that civilizations are fragile, that memory is imperfect. That time itself erases even the greatest works. Yet, within that erasure, something persists. Fragments survive, hidden in myth, embedded in ritual, inscribed in stone. They are passed forward, waiting to spark new beginnings. Picture human history not as a line but as a spiral. Each age rises, falls, and leaves traces that inform the next turn. The spiral moves forward but always circles back, echoing what came before. Atlantis, in this view, is not a lost city but a symbol of all the lost ages, each one both unique and familiar, each one carrying seeds into the future. This cyclical vision changes how we see ourselves. We are not the pinnacle of a single, unbroken climb. We are one phase in a repeating rhythm, inheritors of fragments, builders upon ruins, custodians of knowledge that may itself be lost one day. To understand Atlantis is to understand fragility, but also resilience. For even as worlds fall, new ones rise. Speculation invites a haunting thought. If civilizations have risen and fallen before, what traces of ours will endure? What fragments will future ages carry forward? Perhaps a story, perhaps a monument, perhaps only a myth. The cycle will continue, as it always has. From this reflection on cycles, we move into the realm of evidence and artifacts, the outliers, the objects that seem to fall out of place in our timeline. For if memory carries fragments, perhaps material traces do as well, hinting that lost ages may not be entirely gone. Every timeline we construct for human history is built on layers of evidence, pottery shards, tools, inscriptions, monuments. These fragments fit into an order, a sequence we call chronology. But now and then, a discovery surfaces that does not seem to belong. An object too advanced for its layer, too modern for its context, too strange for the story we think we know. These are called out-of-place artifacts, and whether misunderstood, misdated, or genuine anomalies, they continue to stir imagination. One of the most famous is the Baghdad Battery. Found in Iraq and dated to around 200 BCE, it consists of a clay jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod. To some researchers, it looks like a simple storage vessel. To others, it is unmistakably a galvanic cell, a primitive battery capable of producing small electric charges. If the latter is true, it would mean that electricity was harnessed 2,000 years before modern science rediscovered it. Did ancient artisans use it for electroplating? For ritual? Or is it simply coincidence? A jar misinterpreted by modern eyes eager for marvel? Then there are the maps. In 1513, the Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis compiled a world map that has puzzled scholars ever since. Drawn from earlier sources, it appears to depict not only the coastlines of Europe and Africa with surprising accuracy, but also the coast of South America at a time when it was barely known to Europeans. Even more controversially, some claim it shows the outline of Antarctica, free of ice. Mainstream historians caution that such interpretations are imaginative. The map may simply show distorted coastlines, miscopied from older charts. But the idea persists that the Piri Reis map hints at knowledge inherited from civilizations far older, seafarers who charted lands long before recorded history. In the Americas, the Antikythera mechanism has its twin in wonder. Found off the coast of Greece in a shipwreck dated to the 1st century BCE, it is a complex assembly of gears, dials, and inscriptions, an ancient analog computer capable of predicting planetary movements, eclipses, and calendars with astonishing precision. Nothing like it would be seen again for more than 1,000 years. The Antikythera mechanism is not myth, but fact, a tangible reminder that ancient knowledge sometimes surpassed what we assumed possible. If such a device survived, how many others, more fragile, have been lost? Other artifacts are stranger still. carvings that seem to depict objects resembling modern machines, spheres found in South African mines, perfectly balanced and grooved, dated to geological layers billions of years old, though many scientists dismiss these as natural formations. Hammer-like tools embedded in stone claim to be hundreds of millions of years old, though often exposed as misinterpretations. These controversial finds hover between science and speculation, each one a reminder of how fragile certainty can be when confronted with anomaly. What makes these artifacts so compelling is not simply the objects themselves, but the stories they suggest. If the Baghdad battery was truly a source of electricity, who discovered it, and why was the knowledge not preserved? If the Piri Reis map was based on older sources, who drew those originals, and how did they chart lands before explorers reached them? If the Antikythera mechanism was one of many, what tradition of craftsmanship has been lost, leaving only a single survivor in a shipwreck? Speculation weaves possibilities. Perhaps these artifacts are genuine fragments of lost civilizations, carried forward by survivors, misunderstood by later ages. Perhaps they are reminders that knowledge rises and falls with cultures, that genius can appear and vanish, leaving only echoes. Or perhaps they are simply the result of human imagination, eager to find wonder where the evidence is less clear. Still, they matter, even when disputed. They remind us that history is not closed, that anomalies exist, that certainty is never final. They hold open the door to possibility, a door through which Atlantis and other lost worlds might step. Picture yourself holding the Baghdad battery, its clay rough in your hands, its copper cylinder glinting faintly. Imagine the spark it might have produced, the wonder it might have inspired in an ancient artisan. Picture unrolling the Piri Reis map, the ink faded but the coastlines familiar, tracing the outline of a world you thought no one had known. Picture the Antikythera mechanism, its gears turning under careful restoration, its dials marking eclipses across centuries. These are not only artifacts, they are questions, preserved in metal and stone. And perhaps the greatest value of out-of-place artifacts is not whether they are true anomalies, but how they remind us of humility. Our timeline is provisional. Our knowledge is incomplete. What we think of as the beginning may not be the beginning at all. The human story may be older, more complex, more cyclical than we have yet allowed ourselves to imagine. From these strange objects, our journey turns not to what has been found, but to what remains hidden. For the ocean is not generous with its secrets, and the greatest mystery may not be in the anomalies we hold in our hands, but in the vast absence beneath the waves, the archaeology of absence, the silence of worlds erased. When we think of archaeology, we picture discovery, a brush clearing dust from a buried tablet, a trowel revealing a wall that has not seen light in thousands of years. But the deeper truth of archaeology is silence. For every artifact displayed in a museum, there are countless others that will never be found. For every city excavated, there are dozens more erased by time, hidden under soil, or drowned beneath water. The record of humanity is not complete. It is fragmentary, provisional, interrupted, and perhaps the most important lesson is that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The ocean illustrates this truth more clearly than anywhere else. It is both preserver and eraser. In its depths, shipwrecks lie untouched for centuries, protected from decay by darkness and pressure. Wood and bone can survive where air would have destroyed them, and yet, the ocean also scours coastlines, grinds stone into sand, buries ruins beneath layers of sediment thicker than mountains. It hides as much as it keeps. Consider how little of the seafloor we truly know. More than 70% of the Earth is covered by ocean, yet only a fraction has been mapped in detail. Vast underwater landscapes remain uncharted, invisible to us. Cities could lie there, drowned when Ice Age seas rose, and we would not yet know. To assume that no civilizations existed simply because we have not seen their ruins is to confuse absence with invisibility. Even on land, the record is fragile. Entire cultures have vanished without leaving more than a scatter of tools or the faint outline of post holes. Forests reclaim stone, rivers shift and erase villages, deserts cover cities in sand. If loss is this complete on land, how much more so beneath the sea? This is why Atlantis, and the possibility of many Atlantises, cannot be dismissed outright. If whole landscapes like Doggerland and Sunderland disappeared underwater within human memory, if rivers and plains now lie beneath waves, then the ruins of those who lived there must also be gone, buried beyond easy reach. The fact that we have not yet uncovered them does not mean they do not exist. It may only mean that they are hidden deeper than our tools allow. Speculation finds fertile ground here. Imagine vast cities lying intact beneath sediments in the continental shelves, their streets preserved in silence. Imagine temples toppled by waves, now covered by coral reefs, mistaken for natural formations. Imagine whole regions of civilization erased so thoroughly that only myth and memory remain. Perhaps most of humanity's early story is not lost but simply hidden, waiting under layers of silt. This perspective invites humility. We are accustomed to thinking of our history as known, catalogued, laid out in neat timelines. But timelines are only scaffolds built from fragments. They are not complete stories. Every excavation adds a new piece, sometimes shifting the frame entirely. And every absence is a reminder that the picture is unfinished. Picture yourself standing on the shore, waves lapping at your feet. Beneath that water, not far from where you stand, lies the continental shelfland that once was dry. 100 meters deeper, where the sea bottom now lies, people may have hunted, farmed, built. Their traces are there still, somewhere under layers of sand. You cannot see them, but absence of sight is not absence of presence. In this way, the archaeology of absence becomes a discipline of imagination. It is not about what has been found, but about acknowledging what has not and asking why. It reminds us that silence is not emptiness, but concealment. The ocean is not blank, but closed. And as technology advances, sonar mapping, underwater drones, deep-sea excavation, we may yet open it. The ruins we imagine may one day emerge into light. Until then, absence itself is a kind of evidence. It points to the limits of what we know, the vastness of what we do not. It leaves space for myth, for story, for speculation. Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea. These names endure because they remind us that history is larger than its fragments, that silence too is part of the record. And perhaps that is the most haunting thought of all, that most of what humanity has built is gone forever, buried under the sea, erased by fire, ground down by ice. We are the inheritors not of a complete history, but of scattered pieces. The ocean holds the rest, silent, waiting, beyond our reach. From this silence, we return to possibility. If the archaeology of absence tells us anything, it is that Atlantis need not be unique. If whole civilizations can be erased, then perhaps many Atlantises have existed not as myth, but as forgotten realities. And so we ask, what if multiple Atlantises once rose and fell, each leaving behind only echoes? What if Atlantis was not singular? What if it was not a unique city or island, but one among many civilizations erased by time? The thought itself bends the way we view history. We are accustomed to imagining a straight line from hunter-gatherers to villages, from villages to cities, from cities to nations, finally arriving at the modern world. But what if the line is not straight at all? What if it is layered, cyclical, interrupted by collapse, each new age rising not from nothing, but from the scattered remnants of the one before? The implications are immense. If multiple Atlantises existed, human civilization may be far older than we think. We measure history in thousands of years, but anatomically modern humans have existed for more than 200. That leaves a gulf of time, vast, silent, largely uncharted. Is it so unthinkable that within that gulf, civilizations rose and fell, their traces drowned, buried, or erased? We know it happens. We have seen entire societies vanish within recorded history. The Minoans after Thera's eruption, the Maya in their abandoned cities, the Indus Valley civilization, once vast and organized, its script undeciphered, fading into obscurity. These collapses left ruins and records, but what of those that left nothing at all? The earth is not generous with memory. Fire consumes, floods bury, ice grinds. If a civilization flourished 10 or 20,000 years ago, its bones may already be dust, its monuments sand, its cities lying beneath continental shelves drowned at the end of the Ice Age. Imagine not one Atlantis, but many. An Atlantis in Southeast Asia, erased when Sunderland drowned. An Atlantis in the North Sea, erased when Doggerland slipped beneath the waves. An Atlantis in the Americas, washed away by floods unleashed as glaciers melted. Each would have left survivors, fragments of story, shards of memory. Perhaps their knowledge seeded the next age, appearing suddenly as myth or as inexplicable leaps in technology. Perhaps Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, and Oannes were not gods but survivors of these Atlantises, carrying forward what could be saved. This view transforms the human story. Instead of a ladder steadily climbing, it becomes a palimpsest, a manuscript written and rewritten, each age overwriting the last, yet leaving faint traces beneath the surface. Archaeology reads only the topmost layer, but myth remembers deeper ones. The flood stories, the golden ages, the teacher gods. These may be the blurred ink of forgotten civilizations, seeping upward through time. Speculation stretches further. If multiple Atlantises existed, then the rise of civilization we know, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China may not have been the first wave, but a revival. These cradles of history may have been inheritors, carrying forward faint sparks from worlds already erased. Göbekli Tepe hints at this possibility. Its sudden sophistication seems less like a beginning than a remembrance. Megaliths across the globe may be more than independent inventions. They may be echoes, reverberations of earlier traditions carried by survivors. To consider many Atlantises is also to reconsider collapse itself. Civilizations do not fall for a single reason. They fall through combinations, environmental shifts, internal decay, invasion, catastrophe. If this has happened repeatedly, then collapse is not an aberration, but a rhythm. It is part of what civilization is: to rise, to flourish, to fall, and to seed the next. Picture human history not as a tree with a single trunk, but as a forest. Each civilization is a tree, some tall, some brief, some branching wide, some cut down suddenly. But the forest itself endures, renewing itself across ages. The fallen trees enrich the soil for the next. Atlantis, then, is not a single tree, but a metaphor for the many that have fallen, each one remembered only faintly in the living grove around us. There is also a cautionary note. If multiple Atlantises have existed, then collapse is not only possible but inevitable. We too may be one Atlantis among many, destined to fall and be remembered only in fragments. Our skyscrapers may crumble into future sediment, our satellites burn up in forgotten skies, our myths retold as stories of a golden age drowned by its own hubris. To imagine many Atlantises is to see ourselves reflected in them, fragile, temporary, part of a larger cycle we cannot escape. And yet, there is also continuity. Civilizations fall, but humanity persists. Memory, however imperfect, survives. Even if written history is lost, stories endure. Even if monuments collapse, myths remain. The fragments passed forward ensure that no Atlantis, however erased, is entirely gone. Each contributes to the tapestry of human resilience. Speculation makes the idea almost luminous. Many Atlantises, many forgotten worlds, each carrying its wisdom into the next, shaping the story we now live. Our linear history may only be the latest thread in a much older weave, one that stretches back through ages unnamed. Atlantis, in this view, is not a singular mystery but a symbol of all that has been lost and all that still whispers beneath the surface of time. From here, the question sharpens into contrast. If multiple Atlantises once existed, then we are the heirs of forgotten worlds. But if Atlantis was only ever a myth, then what it preserves is not history, but warning a story of hubris and collapse, told to remind us of fragility. In either case, the message is clear: civilizations rise and civilizations fall. Suppose Atlantis never existed as a physical city, never rose from the sea nor sank beneath it. Suppose instead it was a story from the very beginning, a parable woven by Plato to illustrate ideas, not history. Even if so, its endurance across millennia speaks to something profound. A myth does not survive unless it resonates. A tale does not echo across cultures unless it carries a truth, even if that truth is symbolic. Atlantis may not be a place, but it remains a mirror, showing us what we fear and what we hope. Plato set down the story of Atlantis in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. He describes a people of great wealth and power, blessed with fertile lands, advanced technology, and influence stretching across seas. Yet he tells us they became arrogant, their ambition outpacing their wisdom, their hunger for conquest leading them astray. And so, in divine retribution, the island was struck down, swallowed by the ocean, in a single day and night of misfortune. The message is clear: no civilization, no matter how mighty, can endure when hubris outweighs humility. If Atlantis was allegory, then it was a warning not to a distant past, but to Plato's own Athens. He wrote during a time when Athens had known both glory and ruin, rising to dominance in the Persian Wars, then crumbling in the Peloponnesian War. He knew firsthand how a city's pride could become its undoing. In this light, Atlantis was not history but reflection, a way to tell his people that power must be tempered with virtue, that unchecked ambition leads only to collapse. And yet, the myth has endured far beyond Plato's intention. For every generation, Atlantis has meant something different. To some, it is a paradise lost, proof that humanity once lived in greater harmony with nature. To others, it is a tale of punishment, a reminder of divine justice. To explorers of the Renaissance, it was a literal challenge, to find the island, to uncover its treasures. To romantics of the 19th century, it became a symbol of hidden wisdom, a lost golden age waiting to be rediscovered. Why does this myth remain so compelling? Perhaps because it speaks to a universal truth: civilizations are fragile. However advanced, however secure they appear, they are never immune to collapse. Flood, fire, famine, war, or simply the slow decay of corruption and excess, all can undo what seemed permanent. Atlantis reminds us that greatness does not guarantee survival. Seen this way, Atlantis is not a lost city, but a reflection of human nature itself. It is the story we tell ourselves when we feel the weight of our own hubris. It is the symbol of the moment when pride turns to downfall, when abundance leads to excess, when strength blinds itself to wisdom. The details of the island, its concentric canals, its shining temples, are less important than the moral it carries. Fragility in the face of arrogance. Speculation here turns inward. If Atlantis is only a myth, then its truth lies not in archaeology but in psychology. It is memory of collapse carried forward in allegory, a mythic echo of the countless civilizations that have risen and fallen. Even if Plato invented it, he may have drawn upon older stories of floods and lost worlds, blending them into his cautionary tale. Myth is rarely born in a vacuum. It gathers fragments, shapes them, and gives them meaning. Atlantis may be Plato's creation, but its resonance comes from something older, something deeper in the human experience. And perhaps this is why the myth still matters today. We too live in a time of abundance, with technologies that would seem godlike to our ancestors, with networks that span the globe. We too face the temptation of hubris, believing our civilization to be unshakable, permanent, immune to collapse. It warns that no society is beyond the reach of fragility. It tells us that even in a single day and night, all we take for granted can be undone. Picture the myth not as a lost island, but as a mirror held up to us. We see in it the reflection of our own world. Cities built along fragile coasts, technologies powerful enough to shape the climate itself, ambitions that stretch further than wisdom. Atlantis may not have existed, but its lesson is more real than stone. It reminds us that collapse is always possible, that arrogance is always dangerous, and that humility is the only safeguard against the ocean's reach. In this way, Atlantis serves two purposes. If it was real, it is a fragment of forgotten history. If it was only a myth, it is a timeless warning. Either way, it matters. For in its survival across centuries, it has taught us to question permanence, to remember fragility, and to wonder what worlds may already have been lost. From allegory, we turn back to the ocean itself, not as metaphor, but as archive. For whether Atlantis was myth or memory, the sea holds the record. Sediment cores, isotope data, drowned coastlines, these are the tools with which we now begin to read the ocean's script. If history is layered, perhaps the ocean floor still preserves its earlier chapters. The sea has long been imagined as a destroyer, swallowing ships, erasing coastlines, hiding cities beneath its waves. Yet, in another sense, the ocean is also an archive, storing traces of what has been lost in layers of silt, in frozen isotopes, in hidden landscapes preserved under its weight. If we cannot rely on myths alone to remember, we may turn to science, for the ocean has written its own record of deep time. We are only beginning to learn how to read it. One of the most powerful tools is the study of sediment cores. Scientists drill into the seabed, extracting long cylinders of layered earth. Each layer represents a moment in time, laid down year after year, century after century. Within these sediments lie clues, grains of pollen that tell us which plants once grew, microfossils that map the shifts of climate, ash that reveals the eruption of volcanoes, charcoal that speaks of ancient fires. Together, these silent records trace a history far older and more detailed than human memory. From these cores, we learn how coastlines have changed. We see the sudden rise of seas at the end of the Ice Age, the pulses of meltwater that drowned vast tracts of land. We find evidence of rivers now submerged, their channels still etched into the continental shelf. In some places, traces of human presence have even been preserved, stone tools found miles from modern shores, fishing weirs and hearths now buried underwater. Each discovery reminds us that where there is ocean today, there was land once, and where there was land, there may have been life, settlement, perhaps even cities. Isotope analysis adds another layer to the archive. By studying the chemical signatures in ancient shells and ice cores, scientists can reconstruct temperatures, rainfall, and even the salinity of oceans across tens of thousands of years. These records reveal abrupt shifts, times when climates changed violently, when coastlines advanced or retreated, when seas swallowed land in a single human lifetime. Such events align with myths of floods, suggesting that cultural memory and geological record may be telling the same story in different languages. And then there are the drowned landscapes themselves. Advances in sonar mapping, satellite imagery, and underwater drones are beginning to reveal the contours of entire worlds hidden beneath shallow seas. Off the British coast, sonar has traced the rivers and valleys of Doggerland, once a fertile plain connecting Britain to Europe. In Southeast Asia, researchers have mapped the outlines of Sunderland, a drowned subcontinent that once linked islands into vast continuous lands. In both places, archaeological traces emerge. Tools, bones, structures. They remind us that people lived there, thrived there, and lost their homes when the waters rose. This is the frontier of underwater archaeology, a discipline still in its infancy but filled with promise. For every city like Pavlopetri or Thonis Heraklion that divers have found, there may be hundreds more awaiting discovery. Most of our history is likely still hidden beneath the waves, erased from sight but preserved in sediment. To uncover it, we must learn to treat the ocean not just as mystery, but as archive, a vast library, its shelves written in sand and stone. Speculation takes root here. What if the ocean floor holds not only traces of camps and villages, but the remains of entire civilizations? Streets paved in stone, temples adorned with carvings, harbors lined with ships all buried in silt, waiting for technology to reveal them. If such ruins exist, they would not only rewrite history but confirm that Atlantis was not an exception but part of a greater pattern. Yet even without such dramatic discoveries, the archive already whispers. The sediments confirm floods, the isotopes confirm sudden climate shifts. The drowned landscapes confirm that vast populations once lived where the sea now lies. The broad strokes of myth are echoed in science. The ocean's archive may not tell us the names of those who lived there, but it confirms the conditions of their loss. Picture a team of scientists lowering a drill into the seafloor, pulling up a core that reveals thousands of years in a single tube. Picture sonar maps lighting up the outlines of valleys and rivers, long, hidden, ghostly landscapes returning to view. Picture divers swimming through ruins that once stood above water, their movements a mirror of those who walked there millennia ago. In each case, the past is not gone, it is simply hidden, waiting for us to learn its language. And this is only the beginning. As technology advances, as mapping becomes more precise and deep-sea archaeology more feasible, we may uncover entire chapters of human history once thought impossible. The ocean's archive is vast, and we have only read the prologue. From this vision of scientific discovery, our path leads deeper still into imagination, into what might yet lie hidden in the greatest depths. For if the ocean is archive, it is also labyrinth, and we have barely stepped into its corridors. The question that lingers is not only what we have found, but what we have not, what lies beneath, beyond reach, waiting in silence. The ocean is not only an archive but a veil. Its depths conceal more than any myth can fully describe. We stand on the shore, gazing out across its shifting surface, and know that beneath lies a second Earth, mountains taller than Everest, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, plains that once basked in sunlight now buried under miles of water. To imagine what lies beneath is to accept both wonder and humility. Most of our planet is hidden from us, and within that hiddenness, entire worlds may rest. Speculation begins where evidence falters. Scientists map drowned coastlines and uncover traces of ancient settlements near shorelines. But what of the continental shelves that extend far into the sea? What of the ruins that may lie hundreds of feet below, covered in sediments thicker than pyramids? Could there be massive ruins, cities of stone, temples aligned with stars, roads leading to harbors that no longer meet the air? Imagine for a moment an Ice Age city on a plain now hidden by the sea. Its people build in stone, raise monuments, track the cycles of the sun and moon. For centuries it thrives, its markets alive with trade, its harbors filled with ships. Then the ice melts. seas rise. Slowly, perhaps within a few generations, their fields flood, their temples fall to waves, their streets vanish into salt. Survivors scatter inland, carrying fragments of memory. What remains sinks lower and lower until it lies beyond reach, preserved in silence. We know this much. If such cities existed, they would not be gone. Stone endures. Walls, columns, carvings, all could still rest on the seabed, covered but not erased. Coral might grow over them, silt might bury them, but their outlines would remain. Somewhere out there, beneath waters unlit by the sun, a forgotten city could still stand, unseen for 12,000 years. This possibility transforms the ocean from emptiness into mystery. Every deep trench, every shadow on a sonar map becomes a question. What lies beneath? A volcanic ridge, or the remains of a wall, a natural plateau, or a stepped pyramid long collapsed? The ocean does not answer, only conceals. Even dreams follow this thought. Picture drifting down through blue water, light fading as you descend. Shapes emerge in the gloom, first coral, then something sharper, more deliberate. A column, a stairway. A circle of stones aligned in silence. Fish dart through archways. Turtles glide through what were once doorways. You are walking, in imagination, through a city that lived, loved, and died before history began. Speculation does not end with shallow seas. Some imagine vast civilizations beneath the deepest waters, where tectonic shifts swallowed entire lands. Though geology warns against continents vanishing whole, myth fills the gap. Mu, Lemuria, Atlantis, names for possibilities. Whether literal or not, they remind us that imagination turns the ocean into a mirror of longing. Every unknown shadow on a map becomes a potential ruin, every ridge a forgotten wall. Could entire Ice Age civilizations still lie hidden? It is not impossible. The period at the end of the last glaciation saw seas rise more than 120 meters, drowning millions of square kilometers of land. If humans lived there, and we know they did, then their homes, villages, perhaps even their cities, are now beneath the waves. Archaeology has barely touched these drowned shelves. We have mapped Mars more thoroughly than our own seafloor. The possibility remains open, not yet confirmed, not yet denied. The ocean, then, becomes a dreamscape, a place where memory, myth, and science overlap. It is a canvas upon which we paint our deepest questions. What lies beneath is not only a matter of stone and ruins, but of meaning. The drowned world is a metaphor for the unknown itself. Vast, silent, hidden, waiting. Picture standing at the edge of the sea at night, the moon casting silver across the waves. You hear the water's rhythm, endless, patient. Beneath that surface are worlds you cannot see. Perhaps they are empty, only sand and rock. Perhaps they hold entire stories erased from memory. You cannot know, and in that uncertainty lies wonder. For the question of what lies beneath is not only archaeological, it is existential. It reminds us that our knowledge is partial, that our history is incomplete, that mystery endures even in an age of satellites and science. The ocean's silence tells us that we are still small, still learners in a universe of secrets. And so the meditation deepens. Beneath the sea may lie ruins. Beneath the ruins may lie memory. Beneath the memory may lie the truth that civilizations rise and fall, and that what is hidden today may one day return. The ocean is not emptiness, but promise. It holds stories we have not yet learned to hear. From this dreamlike vision, we return to the present. For if what lies beneath is mystery, then what rises before us is warning. The lessons of drowned worlds are not only about the past, but about us, here and now, facing seas that rise again. The ocean has always taken back what is built too close, and it will again. The question is whether we will listen to the warnings in the waves. Every story of a lost civilization carries with it more than curiosity. It carries a warning. Atlantis, Thera, Doggerland, Dwarka, whether myth or memory, whether stone or speculation, each reminds us of the same truth. Civilizations are fragile. They do not vanish only in some distant mythical past. They vanish in real time, undone by climate, catastrophe, or their own excess. The past is not distant, it is a mirror, and when we look at it closely, we see ourselves reflected there. Today, we live in an age of abundance. Our cities sprawl across continents. Our technologies link the globe in seconds. We harness energy from the heart of atoms. We launch machines beyond the solar system. We reshape landscapes on scales once unimaginable. To us, it feels permanent. We stand on skyscrapers and believe they will outlast us. We look at power grids, highways, satellites, and assume they are the infrastructure of forever. But the drowned ruins of history whisper otherwise. They tell us that every civilization before has believed the same, and everyone has been wrong. The resonance is striking. Past civilizations fell not only because of external forces, but because of choices. The Minoans thrived by the sea, and it was the sea that undid them. The Maya cut forests and strained their land until drought brought collapse. Rome's grandeur could not shield it from political decay and external pressure. The pattern repeats. Abundance breeding overreach, overreach meeting catastrophe, catastrophe unraveling what once seemed eternal. And now we stand in the same rhythm. Climate shifts again, this time not only from nature's cycles, but from human hands. Seas rise, just as they did 12,000 years ago, threatening coasts where half the world's population now lives. Storms intensify, fires spread, droughts lengthen. Our own hubris, the belief that we can build without consequence, echoes the hubris Plato wrote of in Atlantis. It is not myth, it is prophecy disguised as parable. Imagine the future historian, centuries from now, unearthing our cities. They may find skyscrapers cracked and buried, highways reclaimed by desert, coastlines shifted inland. They may find our myths retold as stories of a golden age, our technologies remembered only as fragments. To them, we may be another Atlantis, a civilization that soared, then fell, leaving behind ruins and cautionary tales. This does not mean collapse is inevitable, but it does mean fragility is real. The lesson of lost civilizations is not despair but humility. It is a reminder that survival requires balance with nature, with one another, with the limits of the earth itself. When we ignore these balances, the cycle quickens. When we honor them, the cycle slows, and continuity is possible. Speculation brings the point closer. Perhaps the true value of Atlantis is not in whether it existed, but in the way it endures as symbol. It reminds us that greatness is not measured by how high we build, but by how well we endure. Civilizations rise and fall, but wisdom endures only when it is remembered, when its lessons are taken to heart. Atlantis is less about what was lost, and more about what we risk losing if we fail to listen. Picture the world's coastlines today: New York, Mumbai, Shanghai, Lagos, London. Each is a modern marvel, a hub of commerce and culture. Each is also vulnerable, resting at the edge of rising seas. Imagine waves reclaiming these cities, as they once reclaimed Dwarka and Pavlopetri. Imagine their lights extinguished, their towers swallowed, their names carried into myth. The resonance with Atlantis becomes hauntingly close. This is why the stories matter. They are not just entertainment, not just speculation. They are mirrors and maps. They show us what has happened, and what may happen again. They whisper warnings in the language of myth because sometimes only story can reach us when fact is ignored. The lesson is simple but profound. Civilizations are fragile not because they are weak, but because they believe they are strong. Fragility comes from arrogance, from blindness, from the refusal to see warning signs. The ocean has no malice, but it has inevitability. It rises when ice melts. It erodes when storms strike. It takes back what is built too close. This has always been true, and it will always be true. To look at Atlantis is to look at ourselves. We are not immune. We are not eternal. We are part of the same cycle that has erased worlds before us. The difference is that we know we have records, data, science. We can see the waters rising. We can measure the changes. The question is not whether collapse is possible, but whether we will act to slow it, to adapt, to endure. From these reflections, the narrative flows naturally into the warnings themselves, not as distant myth, but as urgent allegory. For the waves do not only tell of what has been lost, they speak also of what may yet be lost, if we fail to heed their voice. Atlantis endures not only as a story of one vanished island, but as a symbol of all the worlds time has erased. It may have been history, it may have been allegory, or it may have been both, yet its power lies in what it suggests, that ours is not the only age to rise, nor the only one that will fall, that civilizations, however great, are fragile, their monuments destined to return to dust or sink beneath the waves. Atlantis is one name among many for this eternal truth, that the world has been made and unmade countless times before, and so the question remains, how many more Atlantises lie hidden? How many cities, how many temples, how many lives are buried under the sea, waiting in silence, erased yet remembered only in myth? We walk upon the shore, unaware of the worlds just beyond sight, their stories locked beneath the tide. Imagine, then, the ocean floor, vast, lightless, and still. There, in the quiet dark, rest the bones of forgotten civilizations, streets where voices once rang, columns that once caught the sun, walls that once enclosed the warmth of human life. They are silent now, but not gone. They wait, their secrets held in patience, in shadow, in depth. Perhaps one day we will uncover them, or perhaps they will remain as they are, known only through whispers, myths, and dreams. Either way, they remind us of a haunting truth. The sea does not forget. It keeps the memory of every city that once breathed the air, guarding them in silence until the world is ready to remember again.